The lord of the estate's bedroom always smelled of polished wood and freshly laundered clothes. It was a sealed, heavy space, designed to keep the outside world at bay. Thick curtains blocked the light, rugs softened every footstep, and the stone walls ensured absolute silence during the afternoon rest. Nothing moved there without permission. Nothing entered unless it was invited. That day, however, something alive was breathing behind the piece of furniture near the bed. The Blackmore estate stretched across rolling green hills and neatly kept fields, bordered by stone fences that looked as though they had stood there for centuries. It was the sort of place where everything had an owner, a purpose, and a schedule, where every step was watched and every mistake remembered. The lord of the estate liked to say that the land worked because there was order, and order to him meant obedience. Among the many men and women who kept that machine running, there was one who was almost never noticed: Elias, an enslaved worker responsible for the quiet tasks, opening windows, cleaning corridors, changing bed linen, removing the dust that stubbornly gathered in the high corners of the mansion. He moved carefully, having learned early on that survival meant taking up as little space as possible. The lord of the estate did not know his name. He simply called him Boy. To him, Elias was part of the structure, like the stairs or the handrails, invisible, replaceable. But Elias knew the house better than most. He knew the schedules, the habits, the small rituals that repeated themselves every day. He knew when rooms were empty, when servants stepped away, and when the master withdrew for his afternoon rest, always at the same time, always in the same room. He also knew where nature stubbornly insisted on existing, despite every human attempt at control. The attic was one of those places. Few people went up there. The old roof creaked in the wind, and small gaps let in dust, dry leaves, and insects. That was where Elias heard the first sign, a faint buzzing, almost shy, mixed with the sound of wood cracking. He stopped, listened, returned the next day. He learned to recognize that sound, the way one learns a new language. The Wasps had chosen a dark, warm corner, a protected place. The nest grew in silence, layer upon layer, like a patient threat. Elias noticed it weeks before anyone else did. He watched without touching. He learned its rhythm. He learned the right moment. Meanwhile, in the grand wing of the mansion, life carried on comfortably. The lord of the estate's bedroom was his refuge, a wide bed, heavy sheets, the constant scent of cleanliness and authority. There he rested after generous lunches, certain that nothing could reach him within that sealed space. It was also there that the humiliation took place. The afternoon before everything happened, Elias let a tray slip in the corridor. The noise echoed louder than it should have. The lord of the estate stepped out of the room with a hard expression and little patience. He did not ask. He did not want an explanation. He ordered that Elias be punished on the spot in front of the other workers. Nothing excessive, as he was careful to say, just enough to remind everyone of their place. The pain passed, the mark remained, but something deeper settled as well. That night Elias barely slept. The buzzing he had heard in the attic now seemed to pulse inside his head. It was not anger. It was not impulse. It was a cold understanding of how everything worked on that land. The lord of the estate trusted far too much in the order he himself had created. He trusted that closed doors meant safety, that walls separated him from the real world, that control was absolute. Before dawn, Elias was already awake. That day's work included preparing the bedroom for the afternoon rest. Everything as usual, everything predictable. Before that, he went up to the attic, carrying only a thick cloth and a wooden box. There was no rush. The wasps were restless but contained. He did not destroy the nest. He did not provoke an attack. He simply moved it carefully, muffling the sound, keeping the threat alive. The box was shut firmly. Elias went down the stairs as he did every day. He walked the long corridors, crossed the grand wing, and entered the lord of the estate's bedroom while it was still empty. He opened the window to freshen the air adjusted the curtains. With a quick, precise movement, he placed the box behind a low piece of furniture near the bed, where the heat gathered. Then he left, without looking back. In the early afternoon, the lord of the estate entered the room, closed the door, lay down. The silence felt thicker than usual. That was when the buzzing returned, closer, more insistent, at first low, almost unnoticeable, then far too present to ignore. He shifted on the bed, uncomfortable, thought it was the heat, the tiredness. But when he got up to call for someone, the first wasp found open air. The bedroom, the ultimate symbol of control, began to lose its order within seconds. Elias was far away when the scream echoed through the mansion, but he heard it. And he knew that nature had finally been invited into a place where it should never have been ignored. The first scream did not bring immediate help. In the mansion, screams were nothing unusual. Orders, scoldings, reprimands. But that sound carried something different. It was too sharp, too chaotic, as if the body itself had lost the ability to send coherent signals. The wasps poured out in waves. The heat, trapped behind the furniture, had awakened the entire nest. They were not attacking out of hatred or revenge. They attacked because they had been displaced, because their space had been invaded, because nature reacts when it is compressed for too long. The lord of the estate tried to reach the door, but the bedroom was no longer a place of control. The air vibrated. The buzzing filled everything, forcing its way into ears, eyes, and the open mouth locked in a scream that would not stop. Every misstep brought another sting, another burst of searing pain beneath the skin. Outside, the servants exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared to enter. No one dared to open the door of a room that had always been forbidden. The overseer appeared in the corridor, his face confused, unable to tell whether this was an attack, an illness, or some kind of divine punishment. When the door was finally forced open, the scene was unrecognizable. Curtains torn down, furniture shifted, sheets stained with blood and sweat. The lord of the estate lay on the floor, his face swollen, eyes almost closed, his body reacting erratically to the venom building inside him. The wasps still circled, confused and aggressive, as though the space itself had lost the right to exist. It took hours to contain the chaos. The village doctor was summoned in haste. He ordered the room to be sealed, no one allowed inside. He spoke of a severe reaction, of real danger, of absolute rest. The afternoon rest, once a ritual of power, became forced confinement, and for the first time in many years, the lord of the estate was absent. The fields felt it. Without clear orders, the overseer hesitated. The foreman used brute force to compensate for the lack of direction. Small mistakes piled up. Schedules were missed. Production was delayed. The estate, long accustomed to running like clockwork, began to falter in silence. Elias watched. He continued opening windows, cleaning corridors, changing bed linen. No one suspected him. The punishment from the day before already seemed forgotten, swallowed by something far greater. All attention was on the sealed room, the weakened master, and the question no one dared to ask aloud: how had this happened? Some muttered about bad luck, others blamed negligence. A few said the attic should be closed, that the mansion was too old, that insects were inevitable in ancient houses. The explanation was always external, never human. The lord of the estate survived, but he was not untouched. The swelling subsided, the pain eased, yet something inside him had shifted. Confidence, certainty. He no longer slept in that room. He withdrew to another chamber, smaller, less comfortable. He ordered doors sealed, windows blocked, every sign of life he could not control exterminated. Nature responded as it always does, by returning. The wasps were no longer the problem. Now there were rats in the barns, birds on the roofs, gaps in the fences, small breaches multiplying, costs rose. The lord of the estate's temper worsened. His presence, when it finally returned to the fields, was heavy with fear, disguised as fury. He shouted more, punished more, controlled less. Elias remained invisible. It was on a cold morning, weeks later, that the final consequence began to take shape. An unexpected visitor arrived at the estate, a local representative sent to assess old complaints about working conditions and structural safety. Nothing serious at first glance, just routine administration. But the sealed bedroom drew attention. Questions were asked. Why did that wing remain closed? Why were there signs of destruction? Why did a man so powerful avoid the space that had always symbolized his authority? The overseer hesitated. The foreman contradicted himself. Small lies collided. The inspection was extended. The attic was opened. The nest, still visible despite attempts to remove it, spoke for itself. There was no supernatural mystery. There was negligence, carelessness, clear risk, a failure of management, a costly mistake. Fines were issued. Records were filed. The estate's reputation suffered its first real blemish in decades. The lord of the estate tried to respond as he always had, with authority. But something had changed. His words no longer carried the same weight. Fear no longer obeyed commands. Elias heard everything. He heard the arguments. He heard the cracked tone of voice. He heard the silence that fell whenever the room was mentioned. There was no celebration, no smile, only the quiet certainty that something had been set in motion and could no longer be stopped. Months later, the Blackmore estate was no longer the same. Part of the land was leased out. Workers were dismissed. The overseer, under pressure, was eventually replaced. The lord of the estate remained but diminished, a man who avoided certain corridors, certain sounds, certain spaces. Elias stayed on for a while. Then his name disappeared from the records. Some said he was sold. Others that he simply left when vigilance slackened. No one knew for sure. What remained was the story. A story never officially told, an incident treated as an accident, as bad luck, as structural failure. But the land knows, the walls know, and those who observe in silence know as well, because justice does not always arrive with fists or blades. Sometimes it comes in small boxes, settles in ignored places, and waits patiently for the moment when power forgets to respect the world around it. And when that moment comes, no room is strong enough to keep the truth outside.